Macbeth. Macbeth is one of my favorite of Shakespeare's plays. It's definitely my favorite to do in a an introductory class. It is it's a very uh, tightly constructed, well developed, and it's fun. It is a thrill ride. It's a murder mystery of sorts, and it's got all of these popular, really cool things going on that just draw you in. So it's a fun one to engage with. Contextually, this is one of the more interesting plays as well. Historically, we don't know exactly when, in what order any of these plays were written or when they were written specifically, but scholars have been piecing together a general timeline for centuries now, and we'll go with that in a rough way. Generally speaking, scholars pin this play to a first performance in 1606. Significantly, this is just after the ascension of King James I to the throne. King James followed the death of Queen Elizabeth, who was on the throne for a very long time, and especially through the rising element of Shakespeare's career. King James comes to England from Scotland. He had been King James VI of Scotland since he was a very young child. So he was kind of groomed to this role. Notably, King James was the nephew of Queen Elizabeth, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, Bloody Mary, whom Elizabeth essentially, indirectly put to death because Mary was Catholic. Elizabeth was continuing her father Henry VIII's tradition of Protestantism in England, and England as a nation, Great Britain as a nation, was Great Britain didn't really exist, but England as a nation certainly was just ripped apart by violence in that period. So this play is coming about in that environment. Notably, it is set in Scotland, and the character of Banquo is by legend a a forebear of James. James traced his lineage to Banquo. There is a historical basis for this story. Macbeth was a real king, and he followed a real king, Duncan of Scotland. And Shakespeare got all of this from popular history called Holinshed's Chronicles. The history itself, he just doesn't really engage with at all. The history was quite different. He took a lot of liberties with the story. That's fine. He did that with all of his stories. He wrote very few original stories. This he just sort of plucked apart and worked around and worked it up into something very specific. But it is a play geared to the court of James. Very obviously, the Scottish setting. Very obviously, the witches. James was a big fan of witches. I think in 1597, he wrote a book, supposedly wrote a book called Demonology about witchcraft. He was just fascinated by witches. So Shakespeare, having invested so much time in his career, essentially sucking up to Elizabeth, trying to win over some patronage, win over her fandom in a very perilous time for theater companies in general. Now he is making a vigorous play for James's favor. And this works out. Not long after this play is produced, Shakespeare's company is renamed from the what is it, the Admiral's Men, or the whatever, they become the King's Men, his company of players, and so they are James's in-house theater company, if you will. And so much of this is wrapped up in the fact historically that this new king is on the throne and they are trying to appeal to him. But you can also read it, and scholars go crazy with this, as in many ways a warning to King James about abuse of power, about the problems that come up for leaders, about how to be a good leader. And here you could see Shakespeare again, sort of putting his arm around his demographic, let's say, but at the same time prodding them to a new understanding of one thing or the other. And this is a continual theme throughout Macbeth specifically. There is a further complication historically in that in November of 1605, just a little bit before this, 1603 was the ascension of James to the throne. 1605, in November of 1605, is something called the Gunpowder Plot, where a group of terrorists, essentially Catholic terrorists, tried to blow up British Parliament with James in attendance, James and his family in attendance for the first day of the House of Lords or something like that, the inaugural session, and he was supposed to be there to get things started or whatever. And there was a plot to bring in barrels and barrels and barrels of gunpowder, put it in the basement of Parliament, and just light a match and kerblooey. There goes the Protestant power structure in England, and the Catholics would then supposedly take over. It was found out, it was foiled, the perpetrators were caught and killed for the most part, but this, very early in his reign, led James to be a little paranoid, very anxious about these problems. And you can see, well, somebody tries to blow up you and your entire family with dynamite or gunpowder, it can make you a little bit on edge, can make you a little bit frightening, quite frankly, can lead to some serious anti-terrorist overreach in trying to prevent further crimes like that. So you can read that warning into this as well. The play itself is fairly simple, however, on a plot level. It is very efficient. It is the second shortest play Shakespeare wrote, period. The shortest, I believe, is the comedy, A Comedy of Errors. It is the shortest tragedy, though. It is roughly half the length of Hamlet. So it's really very efficient. It is a kind of ruthless storytelling that is more thriller than anything else that Shakespeare wrote, quite frankly. The plot itself is very simple. It's essentially, it is essentially a morality play from the medieval era, where there are good characters sizing off against bad characters, and in the end, morality, the good characters win. And you can see a lot of the hallmarks of this. Relatively short scenes, relatively flat characters, aside from the first two, from Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. The rest of the characters don't have a lot of development. They're all a little bit on the dull side, quite frankly. But that relentlessness of the plot, that forward-moving momentum that comes from that quickness of development, gives it a kind of relentless character of fate, which plays such a vital role in this story, the role of fate. The word fate appears, I think, 7 times in this play, maybe 6. It is one fewer time than Othello, which has the most mentions of the word fate. But even at that, it's more than like 2 or 3 times as many mentions of that word specifically as any other play other than Othello. The witches are often they're not referred to terribly often in the dialogue as witches. They are often called the Weird Sisters. Weird is an Old English word spelled W-Y-R-D. In Old English, weird means, you guessed it, fate. So the idea of fate is baked into this story. And the idea of a character who tries to manipulate fate, tries to get ahead of fate, is ultimately done in by fate, is a struggle, you could say, for the soul of King James, perhaps, who was, from a very early age, kind of raised to take over this role. He was never officially named Elizabeth's successor during her lifetime. He's been King of Scotland since he was a child, so, you know, he's got the job experience. It's a hell of a resume. It's going to be him. So he had to grow up with this sense of fate. But fate can be a trap. When you know so much about the future, where does individual agency step in? What is the role of free will? How much can you blame on fate, and how much do you need to take responsibility for in bringing fate about? These are the underlying questions of this play. The other thing I'll say before we jump in is that you have to watch how efficient the storytelling is, how one thing follows the other, follows the other, follows the other. In the beginning, every element of the plot is laid out very quickly, and you can see elements, themes of the future, of opposites and contradictions, of unreliable appearances, the theme of manliness, and also that fickle theme of fate. All of these elements are there from the very beginning and get the plot in motion very, very quickly so that you don't have time to catch up. You're just holding on to your armrests in that theater, trying to maintain, okay, what's happening now? What's going on? Who's that? What? And it is a roller coaster ride driving you relentlessly, relentlessly, relentlessly towards the inevitable end. That's what makes this so much fun. It is a short play. It is a rock'em sock'em adventure play. It has all sorts of sexy stuff going on there. It's got witches, it's got murders, it's got a head dangling around by the fist at the end of it all. It's got blood by the bucketful. It is a thriller in the most Hollywood sense of that word. It is a thriller. And if you can lock onto those elements as you are gingerly stepping into the Shakespearean corpus, then that's enough for now. Seize on what you can. Understand that, all right, other things might be going on. I can't follow everything, but seize on what you can, and it's a way in. It's a first step. It is a chink in that sheer face that you can start to scale to get to the top of Mount Shakespeare.